While we're waiting, Frank, and I let Scott know this, I unfortunately have a hard stop at 7:30.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's get started then. I think that we're, let's at least get started, reviewing the notes or getting any comments about the notes from our last meeting. And so I just want to, as we get started, I just want to remind people that to the extent possible, and hopefully it's a good extent, let's keep ourselves mute because some of our microphones really pick up on that extra noise. So keep yourselves mute, but remember that you're on mute, and then unmute yourself when you want to say something. As we wait to see if we can get Buzz on and Myles audio working anyway, let's just see if there's any comments on the notes summary from last month's meeting. Does anybody have any corrections? And we'll give some extra time for folks that we can't hear, like Myles, to Myles, you could just chat anyway, saying that you're that you've got something that you want to change, and then we can make sure that we do that.
So Frank, can you hear me now?
Yes, Myles.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, good.
Test for me too. This is Jimmy.
Jimmy, yes, I can hear you now too. All right, good. Has anyone else tried to speak and then realized that we couldn't hear you? I guess that's a weird question to ask, right? If you have tried to speak and no one has said, hi back or I can hear you, please chat something so that we know there's a problem. And Scott, we're still working on Buzz, I imagine, right? Okay, so back to the notes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments, changes?
I have a comment.
Go for it.
They were so abbreviated that that they were practically meaningless.
What is the change that you would like to make?
Well, I would like to have a better idea of what the conversation about the bikeways on Gaylord, Washington, Clarkson, and Grant included. Three paragraphs do not really describe what went on in the meeting.
Scott or Curt, would you like to expound?
Sure, and we can rehash that a little bit, Caroline. If you're really interested in actually hearing the discussion, we did record the meeting as well, and we'd be happy to send you the recording so you can hear the full discussion, because I know you couldn't make that meeting. But we did discuss your recommendation. We did acknowledge that there needed to be some kind of impact of the parking situation along those corridors as part of those studies, which are included in all of our transportation recommendations and mobility recommendations. And then there was also a couple of things that were already included, I believe, in our plan that you recommended, such as why don't we look at Grant instead?
Yes.
And we are looking at Grant. Grant is a recommended bikeway as well, so it's not one or the other. We're actually recommending both of those corridors be included. And Scott, did we? I thought we wrote up kind of a response to that, and if not, we can provide a written response as well. Scott, if you know anything I'm leaving out of that discussion.
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or suggestions about the notes from last month's meeting? Okay. Well, then let's move on. I do want to welcome everybody, all of the steering committee members. Welcome to our final meeting of the East Central Area Plan. Let's see, 3 years and a couple of months. And yeah, kind of a cool ride. We said from the very beginning that we were going to strive for consensus, but with the variety of people that are on the steering committee, we knew that consensus was going to be a tough goal to achieve, but we also knew that the process of having a variety, people from different backgrounds and with different interests, that it was going to make this a strong plan and as strong a plan as possible. And in doing so, it was going to create some conflict, some tension, and ultimately a good deal of compromise as we certainly get into the final stretch, which is, we're way into the final stretch at this point. So I really want to thank everybody for all of the participation, not just because I know that you did more than just these steering committee meetings. You've read troves of information. You participated in other meetings, focus groups about affordable housing, focus groups about historic preservation, focus groups about green infrastructure and environmental resiliency, and transportation, and then going to various high schools and churches and participating in the dot voting and talking to your neighbors and getting them out to the meetings and getting their feedback both online and in person when the world still allowed that. So the amount of time and effort that you have put in as individuals to make this plan the piece of work that it is right now is really appreciated, and I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean anything. I do want to say that I appreciate everyone's effort here, and for the council members that you're a little over a year into your tenure, really appreciate the participation that you've had over the last year on this process as well. And so what the goal of this last meeting is to decide on endorsing the plan, an endorsement from this steering committee moving forward for this plan that's in front of us. That may mean that we're going to be we're going to have a conversation in just a little bit about some potential changes, the last, tinkering that we can potentially do on the plan before we take that vote. So what I would like to do, just because I just want to see, how close we are, and then from there, gauge where we need to be spending our time during this meeting on the fine tuning of some of the changes. So in order to gauge where we're at right now, what I want to do is, this isn't the be and end all. I just want to take a straw poll of all of the steering committee members on the call right now and see whether or not, as the plan exists tonight, if you would be endorsing it to move forward, through the process as it goes to planning board and eventually city council. So this is a straw poll This is not your final vote. It's a straw poll just to see where everybody is at. So what I would like to do is, and let me just get a clarification, because from Curt and Scott, my memory is anyway, when we started this process, that the city council members were, I don't know what the term is, but I'll just say ex officio, so that they participate when they are able to and have the ability to do it, but they weren't ever voting members. Curt, Scott, can you remind me if that's the deal?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously their vote is for the adoption at city council, but they're not voting members of the steering committee.
Okay. So then and again, as a straw poll, let's just, let's do it this way. Let's just, in the chat, I guess I'm assuming everybody has the ability to get onto the chat and comment there. But let's do it that way, just to see where we're at. So he's saying yes means that that for the straw poll, you are a thumbs up and a yes to the plan as it is. You realize that it's not perfect and you don't have everything that you want in there, but you would be voting yes to move it forward. A no vote is no, I would not be endorsing this plan to move forward. So give everybody a few seconds to type in yes or no. I just try to make my chat a little bit bigger. I can only see like one vote at a time here, but let's see.
Looks like everyone except Bob
Has voted? No, Bob has voted.
Oh, then I don't see it. Hang on.
He's close to the top. All right, so let's see. First, I've got 1, 2, 3.
It's possible that some people only responded to you.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I see, Bob. Now it was some people responded to everyone and some just responded to host and presenter.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. All right. So I'll just read them off then. And maybe, Scott or Curt, can you just like take the tally as I say?
Yep.
Okay. So Jimmy Balafas, yes. Not perfect, but yes. Jesse Clark, yes. Frank, me, yes. Caroline, no. Myles, no. Bob, yes. Michelle Reichmuth, yes. That looks like all the votes that I have. How many votes is that? Is that everybody?
Yeah, I think it's 5 yeses and 2 nos.
Okay. Okay. So we have, okay. So anyway, so 5 yeses, 2 nos. Great. So now what I want to, so that is just a way for us to, get a little bit of a sentiment, from the committee right now. So I'm going to turn it on over to Scott and Curt to go through the potential changes to the draft plan. As we go through this, what will be helpful to know is, especially from those who, not exclusively, but certainly from those who have said no in the chat, to be able to specify if this was changed, if we did it this way, then I would change my vote from yes to no. And that goes in reverse as well. If we changed this to something else, my yes would change to a no. So that's the real kind of primary way that we want to be looking at it for this last meeting right now. All right, Scott, Curt, you want to jump in?
Yep. Thanks, Frank, and thank you, everyone, again, for all of your time and effort volunteering on this project. It's been a great process. I see Jesse just asked a question about does this process need to be unanimous? And in short, no. If you remember our first steering committee meeting, what our goal was and still is tonight is to try to reach a consensus. The city council members, the previous city council members who appointed the steering committee intentionally tried to appoint a variety of different viewpoints to the committee. So people that are more business focused, residents that had different viewpoints with the goal of trying to find a middle ground and a compromise and a consensus. And so that's really what we're trying to find. We've always said, though, that we can't obviously force a consensus. People may just have different points of view and we'll just need to agree to disagree. But I think this is what we've been working on, I think, for the past 5 meetings now, is trying to find that consensus. Some steering committee members have provided changes. We've discussed those changes. We've made some changes, and so we'll continue that discussion tonight in an effort to try to find consensus, as was our original goal. So we did get some discussion items tonight from steering committee members. I'll go through the first one, and this was initiated by Buzz originally, thinking about parking requirements along Colfax. And the original language that we had really focused on looking at barriers to redevelopment along Colfax, and particularly, is parking a barrier to redevelopment? And I think Buzz's point of view, he's not here to clarify, but I think everyone kind of heard his point of view, was that basically we should let the market determine parking requirements. Essentially, let's not regulate parking requirements, but instead let the real estate development process determine parking requirements. And that's, typically done through what a developer thinks is needed for to be able to, lease and sell units. And also sometimes it's a requirement of financing. And we had a lot of discussion around that. And I think where we landed at our last meeting was talking about an evaluation of parking requirements, but not just limiting that evaluation to does this impede development or does it not, but actually looking at parking requirements broadly and asking the question through an equity lens. So are our parking requirements restricting equitable, affordable housing, historic preservation, mobility issues? Is the parking configuration and parking requirements actually generating traffic that may be, unsafe to pedestrians and bicyclists? Looking at this long term, will we need the same parking requirements in 2020 as we will in 2030? So that was kind of our discussion, and where we landed on was broadening the recommendation to include these things that I just mentioned. We kept in the language, which is in front of you here on D, about making sure that we are looking at parking requirements, but also looking at them through an impact to street parking. And any changes to parking requirements, we would look at any impacts to street parking supply and making sure we're coordinating our parking management programs with any of those reductions. We did get an email, I think went to the committee, that we also add in to this language here, and D from Buzz, that we add in economically feasible development. And I guess that's what's up for discussion here as a proposed change from buzz. We oftentimes, as city planners, get requests for putting this type of language into plans. And typically we discourage adding in economically feasible to recommendations just like this, because that can be a nebulous type of term and not really clear. And what we want to do is really focus on the outcome of what we're trying to accomplish, and not necessarily the means to it oftentimes. So I guess from a staff perspective, in our consideration, as you maybe discuss adding in economically feasible or not, we would just recommend that the focus here is on the outcome, and that's looking at parking requirements through the lens of providing the things that people want to see along Colfax, and that's equitable development, affordable housing, safe walking and pedestrian and bicycle environment, and is it actually serving the need and impacting street parking? So we feel, in terms of CPD staff, that the current language is good language. And with that, I'll turn it over to the committee to discuss whether we would want to add in the Buzz's suggestion of economically feasible.
So, and Buzz is still not on the call. Are we expecting him, or is he trying, or is he not unable to make it? So this is what I'd like to do. Let's I think it would be safe to assume that Buzz will still be in support of this addition. So what I'd like to do is to see if this has any valence amongst the rest of the steering committee. So is there somebody else, is there another person or two that also thinks there should be this proposed addition that suggests?
This is Jess. I personally am not in favor of using that kind of language. To me, economically feasible is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. It's like, who is it economically feasible to? And I suspect that's why, Curt, you suggest, discouraging language like that. But so, in my opinion, that's not where that kind of language belongs.
Okay. So, but
I agree with Jesse.
Okay, so, and before we debate it, I just want, if nobody else, agrees with it, right, then I'm fine with moving on. But but if somebody else does agree with Buzz's proposed addition, then I'd like them to speak up without fear, and then we can, discuss it. But if nobody else does, agree with Buzz's addition, then we can just move on. So for anyone, to feel comfortable to say, yes, I agree with Buzz's addition, please do so.
I agree with Buzz's addition. I don't know if what I provided during the email was sufficient enough, but I feel like, projects either happen or they don't. And it basically comes down to feasibility. If a developer is looking to build a project and it doesn't pencil out, and I get Jesse's point of view of that penciling might be different in the eye of the beholder. But there are market rate returns. And, for example, I gave that project of multifamily is a 6% return on cost. It's usually like a hurdle rate a developer tries to meet. So let's say the project is $100. If the rent doesn't bring in $6 for every $100, the project doesn't happen, right? So if there's other avenue, I think Buzz's intention is just to make sure that projects get developed. So he's just trying to give a tool. So I'm okay without having it, but for the people who are voting no, just maybe offer a different solution, right? Or a different, it's easy to criticize something, but let's try to come up with something that makes it so a developer has the tools to get this change to happen within the district or the area plan.
So, Jimmy, let me ask it this way. Is the current language, do you see a problem with so understanding what you just said, do you see a problem with the current language as potentially creating a barrier to get to that, $6 on the 100? So is it right here in front of me? Evaluate parking. So is it D basically, or am I reading?
Yeah, if I can jump in, I want to clarify maybe what Frank's saying. Jimmy, to me, I think this language is saying for each respective scenario that you're describing, the recommendation is to evaluate those parking requirements and reduce it or eliminate it if they're found to be restricting that type of development. And so I think it still supports, in my opinion, it still supports the idea that if somebody can prove, hey, I can't make this pencil, then it at least provides the opportunity for those reviewing and those producing the design, et cetera, to come back and say, look, right here it says, if it's restricting that equitable development, we could look at reducing or eliminating that requirement. So in my view, that's kind of how it reads. And I guess that's why I'm curious, do we need to have the words economically feasible to still support that?
Okay.
That's all that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I actually agree with the reducing or removing parking. Like, I'm okay with that. Like, I think the market should drive that. I think transportation is going to change. I just think that we probably don't want to put in something that says economically feasible, because those two terms are very, it's like, who's determining if it's economically feasible? And I know there are different ways to do that, but it just puts a lot of pressure on the plan to say that.
Yeah.
To me.
Okay. I mean, in reality, projects are either going to happen or not, based on whatever this document says. So I don't think this document is going to prevent a development or make a development go in the future. But, I think, I don't know. I mean, buzzing's a beer to speak, but I was just trying to define economically feasible for the group. So if we don't want it, in there, and there's another tool for, as long as you're not hindering development, then I'm okay moving forward. It doesn't sound like this is hindering development.
Okay, then. So I think that, hopefully, it's too bad that Buzz isn't here, but hopefully that, this conversation would allay any of those fears that he would have there, and clearly the rest of the steering committee.
Hello?
Buzz, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm listening to this thing, but nobody can hear me.
Oh, we can hear you now.
We have Buzz on the phone here.
Go, Buzz.
Well, I just now got in. I can't get in through my computer, but I think what the problem is, I'm just assuming, is that what the problem that I'm having is the word equitable. And I thought that to take it and make it clearer, and I don't really care what words you use, but you need to, equitable in the dictionary simply means fair. And I think that's fine, but it doesn't go far enough to illustrate what that really means. And that's why, and what it really is referring to is that I think that it needs to be economically feasible. Now, if there are other words, I like what Jimmy wrote, and that he got very specific, and I think that's what we all need, is to see the specificity of exactly what does equitable mean.
So I'd like to, I think that There is a bit of a challenge here with the term equitable, and I believe I understand what you're saying. And in fact, I resisted speaking for you when we couldn't hear you earlier. But so this is what I'd like to ask Curt and Scott. So equitable in this context is basically referring to the way that equity and equitable has been used in the Denverite plan and the various, comprehensive plans, and especially in a lot of other contexts recently within the city. And it really has very little, if anything, to do. Well, that's not true. It's not primarily about the return on investment. It's about the ability for everyone in our community to have, like you said, Buzz, a fairness in being able to access opportunity, etc. So I think the confusion here came from is when we think of equity in a financial. Through only the context of a financial return, or how a bank might look at it as the equity that you have. That's a very narrow way of looking at it. So then now to Curt and Scott, is there a need or a way that we can add to the word equitable a clarifying clause that states that makes it clear of how it's building off of the Denverite and the comprehensive plan, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the language tries to expand on that with the current language. So affordable housing is part of equitable development. It's essentially just saying that development for development's sake, and this is the Blueprint Denver, comprehensive plan argument. Development for development's sake is just one perspective, but what the community wants, by and large, is development that actually solves multiple problems, simultaneously. So things like, tenant space for startups at a discounted rate, or retaining existing locally owned mom and pop businesses in the development. Affordable units, services, going beyond just purely market rate development is kind of the vision outlined in Blueprint Denver, and what we should, what policies should be trying to encourage. And so with this recommendation, it's saying that we should look at parking requirements as one barrier to that type of development that the community wants to see more of.
I would just add that I think the appropriate qualifying or qualifier word is socially equitable, so as not to confuse it with financial equity.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. We can put in that term, because we do encounter this confusion a lot with the word equitable.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Okay, so then there was a long silence, or relatively long silence. So then the inserting the word socially to precede equitable is the suggestion there. That is there any concern about that?
What does that mean?
Councilwoman, would you like to jump in?
I could teach an entire semester on what that means, sir, but that is when we're talking about equity, you're probably from a generation that thought that things should be equally shared, that everybody should have equal access. And equity is not about giving people the exact same amount of something. It's about giving people what they need to put them at the same level. So it's more about getting people closer to an equal outcome rather than just providing equal opportunities. I think that's the shortest way I can say it.
Thanks, Councilwoman. And we have a brief definition on page 12 of the plan. It says equity means everyone, regardless of who they are or where they are from, has the opportunity to thrive, which I think is getting at the same thing you were saying, Councilwoman, and what Frank was saying earlier.
Yeah, I think Councilwoman put it, was very well said. And again, the difference is reducing the disparity on achieving that outcome. Some people are at automatic disadvantages due to racism, economic status, or other things, and leveling that playing field so they can achieve the same outcome. So in the context of development, that means things that go a little beyond just market rate development and making sure that we are providing development along Colfax and other areas that help eliminate those disparities.
So together, we've got comments that are the existing language does not prevent taking into consideration any obstacles for something to be economically feasible. Curt and others have given the example of parking, but the term equitable is more aligned with the social opportunities. And so with this now, hopefully better understanding here related to this language in this slide, are we comfortable moving forward? And I think it's really, I was hearing Jimmy say that, yes, it made sense, from Jimmy's perspective. So Buzz, it's really a question to you at this point.
I just don't know how most people would read that. It throws it out of the feasibility court into the social equality court.
But it doesn't. It expands it. It expands it. It's still there's still the evaluation of feasibility. Somebody, is like, I'm building this, I want to have 30 units of housing, 1 bedroom, whatever. I can't do it if you're going to require me to have, 1.5 parking spots for those 30 units. It's just not economically feasible. That is a reality that is considered in this language. So it doesn't throw it out. It's adding an additional layer in around social equity.
I'm okay with that, but we got to make sure property rights are not taken. So we can't just put strings on current rights, and so we got to make sure development still happen. We don't want to make it so there's no development in this area. So I'm scared of that new language a little bit too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, Jimmy, this is Curt. I don't, there's nothing in here that would be, restricting property rights. This is basically a question of increasing property rights, not decreasing property rights, right? It's about reducing a regulation that's currently on properties today. So. Okay.
But if you're requiring social issues, compared to, this is, as a property owner, you have the rights to build something. And if this plan says you can't build that unless you do this and this, that to me is taking away your rights, right? And so
if you are a property owner and there are current regulatory barriers to what you can build, you don't have rights to build whatever you want to build. This is saying to reduce regulatory barriers if there is X, Y, and Z here. And so it's not a restriction on current property rights. It's actually getting you closer to having potentially more ability to do things, development with your property rights. It's the whole paragraph and the thing above it.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we're adding social, I think we just need to add, the project needs to be a market project, right? We have markets that.
That's not going to fly. Why would we reduce regulatory barriers just to do market rate development? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm not understanding it. So what is that? You're saying, you can't have, so are you saying you don't want market rate development, or I'm missing that point here?
There is an exchange happening here. C-L1 and D work together. There is an exchange. A reduction in regulatory barriers is coming if the D statement. It's an if then statement and an exchange. Am I correct, Scott and Curt?
That's right. It's saying that we should consider regulatory barriers for some of these priority values that we've heard through this planning process through redevelopment. So that includes equitable development, affordable housing, historic preservation, safe walking and bicycling conditions. So through that lens, we would be looking at reducing the parking regulation.
Got it. So if you do this, you get that. Okay, got it. But if you meet the parking requirement and you're not asking for a parking requirement, you're okay. You don't have to do the then, right?
Correct.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, cool. Then I'm fine.
All right. Well, good. Not surprising we spent some time on this slide, but thank you, everyone. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, I think if I had to guess, that's probably the one that's going to take up the most time. Hopefully, and we have a few more of these slides. I know that Jesse needs to has a hard stop at 7:30, so I'm going to keep track of this time. This one, I think, came from Myles, Scott, I believe. And it's basically just to add Madison Street on our map for pedestrian and bike safety and crossings. And we've checked with our transportation team and they support this. So we as staff support including Madison with this proposed change. So I guess the question would be, does anyone think we should not?
That was
Hearing none, we'll move to the next one.
Yeah.
This one is also from Myles. So we have the current text here on the left, and Myles has proposed basically additional detail. This recommendation is L8. It talks about how we might increase design quality in centers and corridors. So centers and corridors are the commercial and mixed use areas of East Central. So we've reviewed Myles's comments. We are comfortable with adding these into the text. These are, in our reading, this is just clarifying detail of some of the things that we'd be looking at when we do the design quality project. So this is something staff also supports from Myles. So the question again is, does anyone think this proposed addition on the right side of the slide should not be included?
What I mean, it just seems like a bit of a lot there. So the addition is 1 through 5, and then 5 has A through H. So you're saying add all of that to L8A. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's right. So the like mass informed floor heights, building heights, and I mean, those are all details that we would be looking at anyways. So for us in our urban design group, this is more just providing more specificity of what this study would include, which is fine.
Okay.
I have a comment on this. I think it's fine, and it defines. And I'm all about high quality design for our city because there's some projects getting built that are not ideal. I'm just wondering how the city implements this because we're actively working on a project on South Colorado Boulevard, Southeast Denver, and we want to implement like high quality design, but the city, doesn't have the bandwidth to enforce this. So this is a great tool here to really get, good high quality design, but the city right now doesn't really enforce design standards. So how does this get implemented in reality, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think basically this is another recommendation that to do this project, and that project would look at all the tools we have, whether that's a text amendment to the zoning code, an overlay, design standards and guidelines. The exact mechanism is not specified. What's specified is we want to somehow improve design quality, and we should be looking at these things to do it. That's what the recommendation says.
Okay.
I have a question.
That's my team. Hold on.
Number 2, overall compatibility considerations, : what's supposed to follow the :
It's a good question. Scott, is that just a typo on there? Because I think that just might be a period. Or
Yeah,
what's below.
It looks like everything underneath it is supposed to be indented under it.
This I copied this directly from the comments Myles gave us, so maybe he can provide some clarity on if there was supposed to be something there, or if that was just a period.
That may just be a typo.
Okay, well, we'll fix that.
It looks like it's supposed to be a : and everything underneath it is supposed to be under it.
Yeah,
That's what I wondered, Councilwoman.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, so just assume it's indented, and 3 through 5 are actually the compatibility considerations.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, we will move on. We also received a few other comments from Myles. Many of them were things like, I'll start at the bottom, that we didn't think warranted a lot of needing a lot of time to discuss in our steering committee meeting. Graphic legibility, that's, clarity and correctness we can make after this meeting, things like legibility. There was a comment from Myles about our context map, which is basically just a cartography error, where 2 boundaries didn't line up nicely. And so those are the type of improvements we'll make on clarity moving forward. As well as BRT stop locations. We don't think it's needed to put alternative BRT stop locations in the East Central area plan. There's a separate project, obviously the Colfax BRT project, that's kicking off and looking at potential alternative stop locations, and that study will be looking at that. We don't want to predetermine anything in those studies. Parking study data will be included in the appendix of the plan. That's just, we did do a parking study, and we'll provide all the necessary data associated with that.
Point of order on that. This is something that has come up repeatedly for the last 3 years, and we've never seen, that I know of, we've never seen this data. And I mean, this is one of the things that is causing me to vote no, because this is something that I've been asking about, and I know that others have been asking about as well. So why have we not seen this data?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this point. You're right, Caroline, in several meetings. We have a whole parking section of the plan that talks about parking. We have provided a summary of the parking data in the plan. And we've discussed what the takeaway of the parking analysis is and how that parking analysis informed our recommendations at previous meetings. The parking data is simply the data that we don't really think is necessary for discussion. It's basically saying this is where the parking utilization is high, this is where parking utilization is low at certain times of day. And it's a lot of numbers. And so while we're happy to provide that, what we've put in the plan and what we've discussed in these meetings is what does that data mean? And we've summarized the data and said this is what we've learned from that data, and this is how it informed our parking recommendation.
But Curt, part of understanding that traffic or the parking data would be to overlap it with these areas of incentivized heights and these areas of density, as well as proposed bikeways and changes to traffic. And we had been asking about this a long time ago. I don't understand the reluctance to release that. You already had it. And that's part of the evaluation process of where we think or where we're planning to do some of these changes with bikeways, and even we didn't evaluate how BRT is going to change transportation across the whole corridor dramatically. It's kind of like, why wasn't this released earlier?
Well, so a couple of things on that. One is for the example of bikeways, that may be removing parking. Remember that many of the bikeways are not going to be implemented in the next few years. And so any bikeway that is going to be looking at repurposing any parking lane, they would do a parking analysis as part of that study. And that's part of the recommendations in Essential. We don't think that if a bike lane project goes in the year 2030, that they should be using 2018 parking data in the East Central area plan to make that decision. So we don't think that's a relevant point about street improvements, because what we've said in the actual recommendations is that those studies that look at parking analysis should be done at the time of implementation of those projects. What we've also said with your first point, with respect to where development is occurring, what we've said very clearly that the takeaway of the parking study is that, yes, there is much higher demand for street parking near Colfax, which is where we are proposing development. That's not, I don't think that's surprising to most people. And the study basically just confirmed what I think most people already know that live in this area, that parking near Colfax is in shorter supply than parking on the south side of Congress Park, where there's not a lot of commercial activity. So,
but I would be inclined to say, just as we have documented existing conditions with architecture, with people being displaced, this should be part of that documentation to understand what it is at this moment in time. It will change, I agree. But we need a snapshot of what's happening now to understand what the constraints are. So as we look to the vision for the future, yes, we can change it. But I would just like to understand where these issues are currently. You mentioned Colfax. We've also got Josephine in York, as well as Colorado Boulevard. My neighborhood, at least, is surrounded by these huge corridors, and some of these are retail centers. So documenting that, I think, is important for people to see and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we agree with that. And like everything else we've done with the existing conditions, those are all in appendices. and we will include the data, the raw data from the parking analysis in the appendices. But again, we think we've discussed and provided the relevant information in terms of the takeaway of the parking study in the plan itself. So that's our perspective on it.
Okay. I'd like to get back to the graphics legibility. I know the graphics were presented. I'm talking about more the height maps. And I did see some new comments come in on that. I think the issue I've been having with that is at the scale it's being presented, people don't understand what they're looking at. It's very difficult to look at the graphics and find out what building somebody's talking about. And I had to enlarge them to even try to understand what properties are included in that. It's really not clear. And for this plan to be recommending, like on Buzz's property, 8 stories, and I can't tell if the properties next door are part of that. I think it's kind of hiding what is being proposed. And even, I almost wish there had been some online data source where people could look up and see where these outlines are and what properties were included. It's just kind of this gray zone, and it's so small, people just don't look at it, but they're not realizing that the property next door is going to be 8 stories, or being recommended to be 8 stories. I think that's a major issue.
Myles, is so just so that I'm clear, because I'm hearing 2 different things from the way that you describe graphics legibility to Curt. So is there something more to graphics legibility than height map, or should that have really said height map?
Actually, as you look across the different graphics, if you're looking at, you're trying to find specific properties of where these changes are occurring, it's very difficult to see what's included. Okay. I guess I would like to just have everything be very understandable, or somehow linked to something that would show that information. It's just this, you cannot see what is being proposed and what properties are included in that. Okay, so height map is sorry, Councilman, I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear on this. So height maps is a component of the graphics legibility. Generally, the graphics legibility should be better, and in a specific case that you're articulating, the height map is an important piece of that. And so maybe just for the sake of being able to zero in on the particular topics to discuss, let's capture that the height map is something to potentially come back to. And I know Curt didn't finish going through this, but Councilman Hinds, you were about to say something.
I have a question, because we are, sorry, there are 2 we's that both involve me, so how about I be more specific? The East Central Area Plan Steering Committee is considering adopting a document that will be a guiding document for the next 20 years. We, as in City Council, will then use that guiding document, right? And but what we, in our quasi-judicial capacity, use as criteria for judging, does that include the graphics, or is it just the text? And the graphics is bonus readability and usability, but the quasi-judicial legal binding is just the text. I guess I'm trying to understand. I certainly think that the document should be approachable and accessible for everyone. I just wonder if the graphics are, if they're off, does that put us in a legal quagmire, or is it just the text that is the legal definition? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, it's both if the graphic is related to the actual text. So oftentimes the graphics in plans are not related to the policy language, and they're just illustrative of a concept, or it's an image that's giving an example. But in a case of a map, like a height map, it would be both the graphic and the language itself. I'm going to come back to the height map, because that's a topic that I want to hit on after I go through a couple other things on this list from Myles. There was the neighborhood traffic calming to make sure that that's consistent with a study that was done in the Congress Park neighborhood. We have looked at that study. It's completely consistent with that plan. And so we're comfortable with that recommendation moving forward, that those two plans are consistent. The East Central plan is consistent with the Congress Park traffic study. There's also, there was a question about, there were several questions from Myles about specific properties and whether they should be included in the height recommendations map. Staff in CPD at this point in the process, we are discouraging reopening the height map for discussion. The height map has been open for public feedback for over a year, basically since May of last year. And we've responded to any questions and comments about, legibility or which property is this applying to. We have clear labels on all the streets. And at this point, we think that because there's so many different viewpoints and basically philosophical viewpoints about building heights along Colfax, some people think that we've gone too far with the building heights. Some people think we haven't gone far enough. And what we've tried to do is create a height plan along with accompanying policies that is intended to accomplish the goals that we agreed on earlier in the process. So one of those goals is to focus development and growth in locations that are close to transit along Colfax and other corridors like Colorado. Take a balanced approach to development and not just encourage redevelopment everywhere, but actually through our consultants and with Cheney, we did a lot by lot analysis using criteria on which properties should be looked at for greater heights and which properties should be preserved and not encouraged to redevelop. And so we have done that surgical approach and looking at every property. If it met certain criteria, we put it on the eligible for heights, and if it didn't, it's not. And we've also made any height increase contingent upon the goals articulated in the plan along equitable development, affordable housing, historic preservation, and those goals. So we've written that into the policy language. We as a department and CPD support the height strategy. And just like when this question came up to reopen the height map at a few meetings ago, where some members of the steering committee asked us to look at additional properties for more height along Colorado, we as city staff members strongly discouraged that. And we actually did not make those changes that were recommended by steering committee members. And so to be consistent with that decision, we are also recommending at this point, being our last meeting, that we not reopen we encourage you to not reopen the discussion around the height recommendations map, because this is the discussion that's been had for over a year, and we don't think it's appropriate at this point in the process.
Okay, quick comment, Curt. I talked about the legibility on the first round, and it's an issue of, again, I still don't know what properties are included in those height recommendations. I cannot tell at that scale, nor has it ever been disclosed. And then also going back to the heights, I understand your position about not wanting to open it up, but I started looking more closely at some of the properties, and you've got a parking lot right to the west of National Jewish that is just a parking lot and is bigger than Buzz's Paradise parking lot, and it's 3 stories. But yet Buzz's property is 8. And so it's like I can't figure out some of the logic as to how these heights were applied. And Buzz's parking lot went from a 3 to an 8, whereas this other one was just a 3. And I only started looking at those properties very closely because the neighbors started asking questions. So it just raised for me, I never knew what was included because it was never clear at that scale which properties have which height attached to them. I don't know at this point, nor have you ever disclosed that. So it has been challenging, but I would still like to say I had asked this a long time ago because when it was presented to the public, people aren't paying attention because it's this little graphic. They don't know what was being recommended. So that's my issue with it, is the people didn't really know what they were looking at.
I'm going to do a time check. We're at 7:15, and we still need to, make sure we're giving Jesse enough time to take a position on endorsement. So.
Right. So, and I mean, what I'm hearing, and perhaps I'm not hearing it correctly here, and there's still one bullet that you haven't gotten to here, Curt, yet, but so I do want to let you get there. But is that the legibility is a big piece of that, according to Myles anyway, in terms of making sure that people understand what it is that they're looking at. So let's really dial that piece in, and let me allow you to get to that final bullet there.
Yeah, and so the last one is a new policy that we added into the plan, which emphasizing better empowering underrepresented residents to be more involved in city government. We have a variety of strategies on how to do that. I think Myles had a question about one particular strategy in that list that we have under this policy, which had to do with reforming the R&O ordinance. And this is something that's been thought about for a long time in the city, and looking at the R&O ordinance to try to improve the R&O system to be more representative. And there are some efforts by certain city council members who are interested in this. And I think CPD, we partner a lot with R&Os on a variety of projects. We fully support looking at ways to improve the R&O ordinance, and especially as we implement the recommendations of the East Central Plan, which will include a lot of engagement with R&Os. I think that's something we should be basically part of the implementation recommendations for the plan.
I don't think that this belongs in a plan. If you want to take it up as a separate issue in a different kind of situation, I think that would be fine. But to embed it in this plan, especially at this late stage of the game, I think does not pass muster.
And I agree with that. And my question would be, is if you knew you were going to add this, I'd almost like to understand who requested this to be added and why you put this in the last revision. And we were not talking about this a long time ago.
Yeah, I think this was basically in response to critiques of our process that we, may have needed to do more on what this policy says on this slide, which is empowering underrepresented residents. We agree with that. We think we have put in actually a lot of resources in looking at equitable engagement in the East Central Plan. What this is saying is, moving forward, we need to do even more. We need to provide lessons learned through what we did through this process, and in particular when we're engaging the community in implementation, that we need that this is a key piece of that.
Should it be put on the backs of the R&Os though?
Or
that's not what it says.
Disempower the R&Os?
No, I mean, those two comments are not in the actual language, so I don't know where those come from.
When you say those two comments, what do you mean exactly, Curt? I don't understand.
will this disempower the RNOs? And no, I mean, there's nothing in the recommendation that says we should disempower RNOs. So I don't understand that. What it says is right in front is empowering underrepresented residents and improving the RNO ordinance to better represent residents as part of empowering underrepresented residents.
Well, does that require changing the RNO ordinance to empower underrepresented residents?
It may, and so what the recommendation says is that we should support looking at the RNO ordinance for any reforms that may lead to better empowerment of underrepresented residents.
Yeah, but I think if you look at E1, it says consider rules requiring membership from residents at risk involuntary displacement and demographics representative of the neighborhood. I guess my question there is, these RNOs are volunteer organizations, and if you wanted to use a requirement of a specific demographic, if they are not participating, would you then dissolve the RNO because they don't meet the city's criteria? Or are you trying to do something where city council appoints RNO people? I'm not quite sure what these requirements would do, and it's not clear, but I could see it being used in a retaliatory way.
Exactly.
Yeah, remember the key word you said before requirements, Myles, is consider. So that's plan language, right? So that's a consideration that will be made, and the plan recommendation doesn't try to answer every question or solve every problem. It's basically just saying that this is what we need to look at this, we need to study it, and these are some of the things that we need to consider in the process to get to the goal, which is the policy, which is to empower underrepresented residents.
But I would be inclined to say that also should have been part of the engagement, which is handled now at the last minute with you using lots of resources. We get back to these requirements. It raises questions again, why this was put in at this point in time and what the intent is of this. I'm hearing what you're saying, but I also could see it having huge implications later. So I agree with Caroline that we should have discussed this before this became part of the plan.
So Curt, it's Frank, and I haven't heard any other steering committee members weigh in on this, but certainly, pretty strong, pushback from Myles and Caroline, and they're not without a point of that a relatively substantial change is being considered in this plan at this point in time. So, and at the same time, neither Myles nor Caroline are saying that this is an idea that's not worth exploring anymore. I think they're both saying that sure, why not have a conversation about this? But can we do it in a substantial enough manner at 7:22 when we're really shooting to get this out the door? So let me ask this question: is there anybody else on the committee, the steering committee, that feels really strongly about this being considered in this East Central area plan at this moment in time? If anybody said anything during that pause, we did not hear you, so you should probably, chat it in there, because I think we're about to move on. And so
Michelle Reichmuth here. Sorry, I was trying to chat it in and then realized I'm too slow at typing. So I think that statement is really important. I think it's kind of like we want our residents to be able to breathe. I think it's just a really important thing. I didn't see the controversy when I first saw mention of it here today, but I did feel it throughout the process. I didn't feel that the folks that have been working so hard to make this whole plan come together did anything wrong about, how to pull people together, attempts to get involvement from underrepresented folks, but it continues to happen. You can look at the number of women, the number of people of color on this plan. But having gone through this process, I feel like there was a lot of intention to get that right. I'm going on a little side there, but it's an important statement. I don't see how this is controversial. So I would be fine having it added to the plan, but if it's going to slow the process for approval tonight, I say we pull it off and work to continue to work on that important aspect, to have diversity and inclusion in how we run our government and make decisions. Thank you.
Would it be, Curt, I really am looking at the time, and I do want us to move on, understanding that Jesse has a hard stop in just a few minutes. But would it be valuable to, what I'm assuming is that there's definitely, strong pushback from Myles and Caroline here. We could take a vote on this, or but we could just say the steering committee sees the value and the importance of empowering underrepresented residents to be more involved in collaborative and city government. And we would like to see a thoughtful process move forward in order to address that.
I would support that, Frank. As it stands, I do not support it. But what you were just saying, I think, is pretty much what I was saying. Right. This should be pulled out, and a separate process should be undertaken around it.
And Michelle, would you have an objection to what I just suggested?
I feel disappointed that this is looked at as controversial, but I think as long as the understanding that it's an important thing to work on is captured somewhere, I would be in favor of voting yes on the plan if it's removed.
Any other steering committee members want to weigh in quickly on this item?
This is Jesse. I would echo Michelle's response. I think it needs attention, but I also don't want to hold up the plan because of it.
Okay, but Frank, since we're right at a few minutes to 7:30, maybe we start off the endorsement process with this change, if you agree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is this the last slide?
Yeah, there was one additional slide, but I don't think we need to get to it. It was essentially recapping some of the themes from, we got about 12 comments from the public. I'll pull it up just so people can see it while we look at it. It essentially wasn't anything substantive that we think needs to be discussed tonight. It's more of what we've heard for the past year of a mix of opinions on building heights. There was a couple comments about mobility being a little more detailed, which we don't think is appropriate in this plan. More details would come in future studies. And there was a question about including nonprofit developers in our process. Someone said we didn't, and we've included a bunch of nonprofit developers in the process, so it just wasn't right. But we just decided to document that here for you. So with that, I think we can move to endorsement.
Okay. So then would it be appropriate to do, well, should we, I guess what I'm wondering right now is whether or not we include the last point we were just talking about as part of we could take two votes, right?
Yeah, I mean, what you may want to do, since you were working, Scott, were you trying to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I think I was going to say what you were going to say, which is that, when we took the straw poll at the beginning of the meeting, both Myles and Caroline were no's on the plan. So I think the question would be, would removing this change their opinion or change their vote. Because if they're going to be no's anyway, then I think it's up to the committee whether it's worth making a change.
So let's take two very clear votes then. One vote with the RNO piece in it, and one vote without, and see if there's any change in the results. Does that work for everybody?
Why don't we just vote on the RNO thing as just a point, and then vote on the endorsements?
I think that's what you said, Frank. So the first vote would be, do you support the plan with removing the RNO recommendation? Would be the first one. Is that right, Frank?
Correct.
Okay. So I think that's the question.
Okay. So we're gonna do it the same way, and we're gonna do this very efficiently for trustees. So the first vote is right now, and it's do you support the plan with the RNO piece that we were just discussing included in it. So yes, you support the plan, everything that we've talked about over the last 3 years, including this RNO piece. Yes or no, please chat it to all participants. Okay, so I'll get started here. You can have a chance if you haven't done it, but we've got Caroline, no. Jimmy, yes. Frank, yes. Jesse, yes. Myles, no. Heather, yes. We would be missing Buzz and Bob.
Bob said yes. He's in the chat. He did host and presenter again, but
Okay.
maybe Bob, if you want to do it again with.
And Michelle, did you? Michelle is yes. Okay. All right. So I'll go through this again. Let's get to the beginning here. So Heather, yes. Myles, no. Jesse, yes. Frank, yes. Jimmy, yes. Caroline, no. Michelle, yes. Did Buzz vote?
No, I'm not seeing Buzz.
Okay. Well, we're going to take the second vote anyway without Buzz. Okay, so now this is if we remove the RNO piece. Everything else is exactly the same. We remove the RNO piece.
Can we just ask the two no's if they would support it?
So that's a good, yeah.
Because everyone else prefers the plan.
Right.
So if we're just trying to get to what is going to make Myles and Caroline a yes, that's all we're trying to do here.
That's true. So removing the RNO piece, does that change you, Myles? And you can just chat this in, yes or no. Myles and Caroline, does removing the RNO piece change your vote? It does not for Myles. And it does not for Caroline.
It looks like Caroline is still a no.
Okay. So, Jesse, if you are running out the door, I do want to appreciate you and everything. But otherwise, let me, turn it back on over to Curt and Scott to do the final steps here.
Great. Well, thank you. We have an endorsement from the majority of the committee. It doesn't look like we're able to achieve consensus, unfortunately, but it's something we can't force. Obviously, people just have different opinions on some of these things. So our remaining process, we have the planning board hearing scheduled for September 2nd. So mark your calendars for that. It'll be a virtual meeting. If you need some instructions on how to participate, just go to the planning board website or reach out to either Scott or myself. We have a tentative meeting date for city council public hearing October 5th. I think, Scott, we're pretty firm. We're pretty sure that that's going to stick, but we're not 100% at this point, right?
Yeah, as long as the process goes smoothly and it gets approved by planning board and Ludi, we should be on that October 5th date, but nothing's certain at this point.
And I'll turn it back over to you, Frank. I'd just like to say, thank you so much to all the committee members for all the hard work that you've put in over the past 3 years. It's been a journey, to say the least, and we really appreciate your basically your community service and your civic involvement in the city. It's super important, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And and thanks to you all on the staff, thanks to all of the committee members, and thanks to the hundreds and potentially thousands of people who have provided thousands of points of contact or comment, I should say, throughout this process. Good work on all of that. I mean, like I said last week, I was part of the climate crisis task force that went from the end of January to the beginning of June, about 5.5 months. And we, put a question on the ballot for, millions of dollars for the taxpayers to vote on. This process went on for 38 months. And got way more public comment than the Climate Crisis Task Force, and that is due in large part to all of you and all of the work that you did in your communities with your neighbors, et cetera. So thank you so very much for all of that. And please make sure that you've got, and Scott and Curt, I can work with you to make sure that we send out follow-up emails to the steering committee to make sure that they know these dates of the planning board, city council hearings, et cetera, so people are informed about the upcoming events. But, thank you all so very much, and, enjoy the rest of the dog days of summer for, whatever it is that you might be doing. And we'll see you in person, I'm sure, someday real soon.
Hey, Frank, quick comment.
Mm-hmm.
Quick comment here. So in looking at this process and looking backwards, you planners have so much power to decide what is discussed and what is presented. I think the process has some flaws, and we're not able to have you even look at or present things that we bring forward. And I'm under the belief now that there should be some type of oversight, because you can just choose not to deal with specific things and it just drags out over time. And it really seems the balance of power, again, I know you're the city, you choose to do what you choose to do. And I don't necessarily think that is in the benefit of hearing the people and responding to their questions about information. I think it's a huge flaw in the system, and I think it needs to be changed if we're actually going to try to address some of these things, because these plans are very, very important. And this just took too long, and there wasn't enough engagement. You didn't come to the steering committee to talk about community engagement. I mentioned that from day one. You guys just came out with the plan when you got the consultants, that we just lost so much time. And I think it could have been much more impactful had there been better organization. I know funding was an issue, but I think the process does need to be looked at, and it really needs to be addressed, because these plans are so impactful and they're so complex that it needs to be broken up so the community can understand it, it's digestible, and given more time to work through, and that may include education. So anyways, that's my 2 cents.
I also think that it's been very difficult to try to wind this process up and expect the kind of involvement that we all would like, given the necessity to take it all online. These meetings are very cumbersome. It's hard to have a free exchange of opinions when only one person can really talk at a time. And I just have felt that the last several months have been pretty much wasted because we could not see each other. And there is much more to be gained by looking at a person and assessing their body language, and and also having members of the public who aren't on the steering committee present in the room with us. I've just really felt that this, and I realize that it's out of your control, guys. I realize that, but I think that it's really impeded a fair process.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Thank you. Michelle Reichmuth here. Wanted to chime in and just say that, this is a lengthy, deep process, but I felt comfortable with the wording because so much of it had to deal with consider these things. I think that brings to light a feeling of what we want to try to achieve, but we don't have to agree on everything down into the weeds. And so I feel comfortable with the plan, but my big takeaway is that I just feel very proud of my city. I thought you all did an impressive job. I thought we had amazing resources for this. And I know that the process could never be perfect, but it exceeded my expectations. And I want to thank you all for that. I also want to just thank all the members of taking part and participating. And I look forward to seeing how all this is implemented. So thank you.
I'd like to chime in. I'd like to thank Frank to start with for having the ability to, when there was a little bit of distension on any given issue, massaging the verbiage so that more people were satisfied with it. I think you've done an excellent job. My hat's off to the rest of the committee for all the hard work that they've put in. And also, we've never had an uncivil discord in all the time that we've got together. Yes, there's been a difference of opinion, but it's been said courteously to one another. And lastly, I'd like to thank Scott and Curt for all the hard work that they've put in keeping us right on track. They've just been just great, and I think that they've been very, very fair. And I know I didn't get everything that I think that we should have gotten, but a lot of people haven't gotten everything that they wanted. But in the whole, I think it's a really great third draft that I've seen echoes pretty much everybody's sentiments. And so my hat's off to everybody. And that includes, of course, Myles and Caroline. I appreciate all your comments also.
Thank you, Buzz. And I certainly would agree with you about the keeping it as civil discourse. I think that that we've managed that quite well, and I appreciate it. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit better.
Likewise.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Go Rockies. Or Nuggets, whatever.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Did it freeze?